You are about to pay $4 for a can of fried apples that takes 15 minutes to make from scratch. Put it back on the shelf. Because what Appalachian families practicing Southern Appalachian mountain cooking tradition cooked in a cast iron skillet 200 years ago produces something no commercial cannery has ever come close to matching. And the reason you do not know that is exactly what this video is about. There is one specific thickening technique in the traditional recipe. One step. Almost nobody outside the old mountain communities still uses it, and it is not in the Glory Foods version, not in the Cracker Barrel jar, not in any commercial product on the market. By the time I show it to you, you will understand why commercial food processors would prefer it stayed buried. A 14.5-ounce can of commercially prepared fried apples costs more than $9 at major retailers as of 2025, and it contains high fructose corn syrup, preservatives, and a flavor that is a pale copy of the original. A proper batch, made from scratch using a cast iron skillet and 5 ingredients, costs somewhere between $2 and $3.50, and it takes under 20 minutes from start to plate. That gap, $7 a batch, compounds fast across a season. But the money is almost the smaller issue. The deeper problem is what the commercial process physically cannot do. Here is where it gets interesting. Caramelization requires a dry, high-heat environment, fat and sugar working together on a hot surface to break down sugar molecules and release a compound called diacetyl, which produces that deep, butter-forward flavor you remember from a grandmother's kitchen. Commercial canning cannot achieve this. The product cooks in liquid under pressure, which is stewing, not caramelization, and the difference between those two processes is not subtle. The technique the industry replaced was, by the chemistry of the process itself, the one that actually worked. Appalachian families in the mountain regions of Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee understood these mechanics without naming the chemistry. They cooked in cast iron because the material holds and distributes heat evenly, sustaining exactly the temperature range caramelization needs without scorching. They used lard or bacon grease from home-raised hogs because animal fat transfers heat and carries flavor simultaneously. They chose firm, tart varieties, Winesap, Jonathan, Arkansas Black, and older heirloom types like Limbertwig, because the natural acidity in those apples balances the sweetness of the sugar and slows the caramelization before it tips into bitterness. Every choice served a function. Nothing was preference for its own sake. Tom Brown, a retired chemical engineer from Clemmons, North Carolina, has spent decades recovering exactly this kind of embedded agricultural knowledge, driving over 30,000 miles a year to catalog heirloom apple varieties and document what each one was bred to do. Brown's work parallels that of Lee Calhoun, author of Old Southern Apples, whose documentation of varieties native to the Southern Highlands remains one of the most complete inventories of what the region once grew and why. Brown told interviewers that for Appalachian families, a diverse orchard was fundamental to survival and good eating alike, with residents developing varieties that matured at different intervals and served specific culinary purposes. During his research, he found references to the Junaluska apple, said by the tradition to have been cultivated by the Cherokee in the Smoky Mountains and named for an early 19th century chief buried inside an antebellum-era orchard catalog from Franklin, North Carolina. That variety disappeared around 1900. The knowledge of what it was for disappeared with it. Now, if you are thinking this only applies to someone with a farmstead and a heritage orchard, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. Granny Smith. Apples from any grocery store run roughly $1.50 to $2.50 per pound as of 2025, and 4 to 6 apples covers a full batch. Add 2 to 4 tablespoons of butter, half a cup of brown sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of salt, and the total ingredient cost for 4 to 6 servings lands under $3.50. A cast iron skillet costs $20 to $35 new at any hardware or farm supply store and outlasts every non-stick pan you have ever owned. If you already have one, the barrier to starting this weekend is 0. Melt the butter over medium heat, add the sugar and cinnamon, and let that simmer for 3 minutes until the sugar begins to dissolve and the fat starts carrying caramel notes through the pan. Add your apple slices, stir to coat every surface, and cook on medium for 8 minutes without rushing the heat. The low and measured approach is not patience as a virtue, it is the mechanism itself. But here is the thickening technique most people never learn. The sauce technique that separates every batch you have ever tasted from a commercial jar. The step I found documented in a traditional recipe recorded through the historic Union County, North Carolina Heritage Archive, and confirmed through material drawn from the Foxfire Book of Appalachian Cookery, published by the Foxfire Fund in 1984 and reissued by the University of North Carolina Press, a volume built entirely from direct interviews with named Appalachian practitioners who demonstrated these techniques on record. The step is this: 2 teaspoons of cornstarch dissolved in cold water, added to the apples in the final stage of cooking. The cold water suspension matters. Cornstarch gelatinizes at approximately 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, so when it contacts the hot pan, it thickens almost immediately, trapping the caramelized sugars against the apple slices rather than letting them pool and harden at the bottom. The result is a glossy, clinging sauce that holds its texture and its flavor through to the plate. Commercial canning produces no equivalent result, because the physical process of pressure cooking in liquid makes it impossible. Now, here is the honesty. This technique performs best with firm apples, and softer varieties like Fuji or Gala will break down before the caramelization completes and the cornstarch glaze sets. That is a real and genuine limitation. The commercial food industry would likely point to this as evidence that their standardized process delivers more consistent results. What that argument leaves out is that selecting the right apple was always part of the technique. The knowledge was never just the recipe in isolation. According to the tradition, it was the complete system: the orchard, the variety, the fat, the skillet, the cornstarch step, passed down as an integrated whole. Separating the pieces and then claiming the pieces do not hold up is not a counter-argument. It is the mechanism of displacement. The Foxfire documentation draws on communities whose foodways trace back to European settlers who carried apple seeds and grafted stock into the Appalachian region during the 18th century, and by the early 19th century, the Shenandoah Valley had grown into one of the country's leading apple-producing regions, cultivating varieties like Hughes crab that served purposes commercial orchards would never bother to preserve. By the end of the 20th century, fewer than 100 apple varieties remained in commercial production. An estimated 11,000 heirloom varieties had gone, and the knowledge of what each one was bred to do went with them, orchard by orchard, decade by decade. The Southern Foodways Alliance has documented this erosion extensively, treating it not as a culinary footnote, but as a direct record of how regional food knowledge gets displaced by industrial standardization. Ronnie Lundy, whose book Victuals won the James Beard Award for American Cooking and remains the definitive modern text on this cuisine, makes a similar argument about the whole of Appalachian foodways, that what looks like simplicity from the outside was always a sophisticated and locally calibrated system. The fried apple sits in that system alongside apple butter, stack cake, and the fermented preserves that carried fruit through the winter months. These were not separate recipes. They were a single integrated approach to the apple harvest, each technique serving the part of the season the others could not. What researchers like Tom Brown and Lee Calhoun are recovering now, alongside the archives of Appalachia at East Tennessee State University, heritage orchard programs at Horn Creek Living Historical Farm in North Carolina, and county extension offices across the region, is not a nostalgic trend. It is a correction. The cornstarch glaze step survived because someone wrote it down. The cast iron method survived because the skillets outlasted the companies that tried to replace them. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly buried to protect someone else's market share, you already know what to do. Subscribe to this channel. Next video, I am covering a traditional Appalachian apple cider vinegar method using wild yeast fermentation, and there is one timing detail in the traditional fermentation process that I have only ever found referenced in a single period preservation bulletin from the USDA Extension Service. Every modern guide leaves it out entirely, and that omission is the reason most home attempts fall short. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Tell me in the comments what apple variety your family cooked with, and whether anyone in your family used a cast iron skillet for fruit dishes. I read every comment. This audience carries knowledge the internet has not indexed yet. Put it down here.